enough room on these boards to put the words that I'm going to need just to go through one simple instructional of education. But we're going to look at the word constitutio, and because we're dealing with constitutional law, that's where that comes from. It's Latin. There's many things that you're dealing with that come from the Latin. And when we go to constitutio, it says in the civil law, remember that's the monetary law. Civil is monetary, and it's also pagan, and it's also based on a civil conditional title that you bear. We already have gone over that being the surname. So constitutio, in the civil law, an imperial ordinance, decree, or constitution. Remember Colossians 2:13-15, that Christ blotted out the handwriting of ordinances written contrary to us, decrees. Those are ordinances. It was referring to the laws of men, okay? Or constitution, distinguished from and other kinds of law and having its effects from the sole will of the emperor. Wow. So it's dealing with the sole will of who's in charge. So it's a dictator, just as it would be as God is a dictator. He dictated the Bible. He dictated his rules. You don't want to be part of them? Well, then you may be walking in violation of what is truth and operating in what would be fiction. But in the law of the legal, they have a emperor who controls the state. We used to call that Caesar. And he has his dictation of rules, and he runs his title. So you have your God-given name on God's side. He has his son that he sent, which canceled the debt. That's why it's called a God-given Christian name. And then you've got the world of those who deny that, who operate in the before Christ side, the BC side, under bankruptcy. So they carry a certificate of debt. So that emperor on that side has a tag name for you. It's called a surname, which means a debt or a debtor. You can check these out. Go to Black's Law 4th edition, name, and you'll see names like cognomen, which means a debt or a debtor. But because you don't know these, you don't realize that your last name is a false name, a fictitious name, to feign you of who you really are. That's just lack of knowledge. And it says, my people, speaking from the Creator, he says, my people will perish or be destroyed due to lack of knowledge. So you're going to need to do some research. So now we go to constitutor, which is interesting because when you got to be on one side or the other, but your given name really doesn't belong on that side. We'll bring out the document in a second, again, the statement of birth, and use it as reference so we can understand what's going on. But in their constitution, it's a permanent legal document, and the emperor, or he who in charge of the legal heraldry last names, says whether or not you can use it or not, and under what circumstances. So constitutor, in the civil law, one who, by a simple agreement, becomes responsible for the payment of another's debt. So you just walked in and guaranteed someone else's debt because you took on the title. Now, if that title wasn't yours, and that legal surname at one time was in the possession of another, and then it was assigned onto you, they just passed the hot potato of the debt. And they said, I wonder if this sucker will eat it. So you took it on unknowingly. Yes, you were beguiled. But if you're continuing to operate in consent for that title, well, then you're guarantoring another's debt. And under eminent domain, if the crown who comes up with these fictitious names assigns it into a creditor that they don't want to pay themselves, they just gave the titles over and they said, well, we can make an agreement that people who use that title will have to pay you instead of work for me now. So they just assigned over the workers and all the labor and everything they possibly could ever do in the legal world, and it all basically now is in the power of whoever under eminent domain now controls that. So I think people are not realizing that what's going on in our current world right now is based on the fact that they just basically are dealing with what they consider to be unnecessary debtors, sureties for a debt that they don't want anymore. And therefore, they're going to cancel out their existence. How do you do that? Well, we'll leave that up to what you've been seeing going on medically right now, because I'm sure that you basically would know that there's something very diabolical going on But again, they're only going after those who are willing to be a surety or a sacrificial legal sacrifice, a martyr in the legal world, not in the spiritual, for their debt. And therefore they can cancel that out at any time. Now we're going to deal with the word constitutional objection. Very interesting word, because it's not the same as a constitutional exemption. In exemption, it means truth would be exempt from participating in fiction. But if you object to it, you could be in a problem. So maybe let's look at what's going on here. Let's read what constitutional exemption is, and we're going to do this in part 2 of a video. So the same screen will be here, but we're going to break this into 2 parts.